Welcome to Across Borders, a sit down and talk with myself, Winston, and my buddy Noe over there. And we talk about board games and just the experiences that we have with them because, hey, we like board games. And I bet you do too if you're watching this. So, how are you today, Noe?
I'm good. It's been an interesting week. Pretty much working. Weather over here is pretty nice. It's around 70s, so I like it 70s.
Yeah, 70s is great. You know what else is great? Getting into the hobby. Getting into the hobby of board gaming.
Yes, sir.
No one is born into a hobby. You have to have something that begins it. It has to have a genesis. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about how we got into the hobby.
Yep.
So, like, how did you start? Like, when you were a kid, like, were you a gamer back then? Or is this something that's been more recent for you?
Sh- sure, yeah. For those looking right now or listening, we're gonna try to get this thing posted in not only YouTube and social networks, but also on Spotify. So, by the way, this is the first time we're doing it, so it might be a little strange. We're gonna try to do some decent editing, but it's our first try. So hopefully
So,
you get to enjoy it. But yeah, and answering your question, my friend. So a little bit about me. The name is Noe. For those out there listening, and I'm a software engineer. One of the reasons why this podcast is called the way it is. It's because my friend here, Winston, he's based in Killeen, Texas, and I live in Guadalajara, Mexico. So we sort of started hitting up through social networks and through this beautiful hobby, which is the board games, and that's
that's
just kind
true.
of how we met. And so this is one of the things that we wanted to do together, to just kind of talk about board games and how we became such good friends through the board games, even though we really haven't played together physically. We have used some platforms like Tabletopia and things like that. So and even with the pandemic now, it's pretty hard to do it in
And
person. All right.
it is, it's
Um,
difficult.
yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, no, we don't. I used to have like a big gaming group, and we haven't gotten together for over a year. So it's mostly me and my family, my wife, my kids, a few close friends, so that we see from time to time. But yeah, going back to the topic, just a brief introduction after a brief
Yeah.
introduction from myself, so that you know who the heck you're looking at. Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, I think I got interested in board games from a very early age. I was a very quiet, introverted kid. You know, here in Mexico, especially, it's very common to be interested in sports. You know, because soccer is like a
Hmm.
huge thing here. Like in the U.S. is like the NFL or maybe even baseball, but like soccer is it's embedded in our culture,
Hmm.
very deep, and so it's very rare for a kid like me to not like soccer, so to not be a big fan. And part of that is what was my dad. He was mostly a fan of baseball, and so I really wasn't a huge, fan of sports and not even soccer. But usually when like you got together with your friends, it was like playing a few games and then always playing soccer, and I was like super bored. So I was like the weird kid. Um, and so I remember my early connection with board games. It was the typical, Monopoly, and Life, and games like that. Games that you can get at a convenience store. But I remember as a kid. The one that I remember, because there's one funny thing here in Mexico, right? There's the official nice games, and I quote unquote this, and there's also like the pirated versions here
Yeah.
from local companies. When I was around 12 years old, after playing some of these rip-offs here in Mexico, I remember I was gifted the Monopoly game, and that was my first exposure to something like a little bit nicer and with better components, like because the ripoffs were like super cheap cardboard and
Hmm.
super low quality cards, and it was yeah, it was it was pretty bad. And like compared to the Hasbro things on the Monopoly and anything, the quality was bigger. Like the tokens, probably you know about that, but like the tokens are
Hmm.
like metal, and it was just a bit nicer, right? And the thicker cardboard for the board. And yeah, I was like super stoked, when I was gifted that game, and I liked it. But there was this little problem: no one wanted to play with me. Um, and I remember, the few times that we brought it to the table, we I remember bringing in it was with family. It was either my mom and maybe my brother sometimes, but usually it was like on those Christmas times, and when some of the bigger gatherings. I remember the aunt that gave it to me. She wanted to play with me, and so there was like maybe two or three guys. But then I remember that it became not only a very scarce thing to play, but also it was long.
It is,
Monopoly,
for
and
sure.
it's a long game,
Yeah.
and so there was a point where we stopped playing altogether, and I don't know. I got the sense that I liked the idea of the board game and some of the basic mechanics and everything, but I didn't like the fact that it was just too long and people were bored. And I don't even remember, like, maybe the just one time where we tried to finish one of those games of Monopoly when I was a teen, and it took like 8 hours maybe, and
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think that's one of the reasons why you will hear people say, especially children,
right.
because as a teacher of fourth grade, I hear a lot of people say, "Well, they call them board games because you play them when you're bored," or
Right.
they call them board games because you get bored when you play them. And I think that does because Monopoly is. You ask anyone on the street, name a board game, they're gonna name
Right.
Monopoly 99 times out of 100. And that is because people have experiences with that. It might have been the first game that people have been given, and that's just what everyone knows.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and, and I don't think anyone's actually finished a game in the history
Right.
of the world. At least, I don't think anyone's ever finished a game. What was your like go-to piece when you got that
Oh yeah.
authentic version of Monopoly?
Yeah, I remember I was always picking up the little car.
The little car.
Yeah,
That's a solid choice.
I was a big fan of the car. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting that, you basically, your aunt got you this game, so she kind of is the one who maybe, started the spark that would end up being
Yeah.
a fiery passion of board games in your
Yep.
life. And it's very similar to me because, I mean, my dad liked to play dominoes. He liked to play Uno every now and then, but he was definitely not a gamer. And his sister, my aunt, lived with us for a long time, and she had a few board games, and I loved Clue.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Yeah,
she
you're right.
she taught us Clue, me and my siblings, and I loved it. She had like one of those original like 1980s versions of Trivial
Yeah.
Pursuit,
Yeah.
and I didn't know like any of those questions. I'm like 6, 7 years old, and I'm trying to answer these questions that
Right.
that are difficult for anybody. And but I wanted to play so much that one year for Christmas she got me um, the junior edition, like for kids,
Yeah.
and nobody would play it with me because I knew like 80% of the answers, and my parents wouldn't play, she wouldn't play. I would take it to school on certain days when we could bring stuff from school, but nobody wanted to play with me because it was a board game. They wanted to play with their Ninja Turtles and their Barbie dolls
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever. But I do think that's interesting that both of us kind of got our the first taste of board games from ants. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, exactly. That's cool. It's good. It's cool to find out. And yeah, for those watching, some of these things are even new between us, and just
Yeah, we've
going into
never
a bit. Yeah, we're going
We,
into more detail. We knew the history of board gaming, how we did it together, and one of the reasons that we became such good friends. But like, that's what we wanted to do with this podcast. We wanted to get into more detail about some of these topics and how
yeah,
how our lives have been affected by board games in a positive way, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, and just keeping the story about how I got into this hobby because right
uh-huh.
now it's a full fledged hobby, right?
Yeah, because back then, yeah. So that was like your first taste,
Yep.
Tell me about how that grew.
So to me, the way that I just kind of came back to board games because for a while I remember I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old when I was just got interested and I got the Monopoly, right? And then I
Hmm.
remember my dad gifted me the game of Life later on, and then Uno. We had a little stack of the typical games you can find in a convenience store, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, we play from time to time, and then there was some personal things that happened, and just kind of the whole board game thing just died out for a while. But then I remember when, and this is probably in my around my mid 20s. I remember at work, I started being exposed to Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't play it myself, but I remember I had a friend that started a group, and then that's just kind of sparked a little bit of interest in some, more of that tabletop world. I remember my friend told me about some of the gaming sessions, but uh, to this day, if for those that have played some of these RPGs, some role playing games and
Hmm.
tabletop, they can be super long campaigns, and you need commitment from a party to do them. Probably now in the pandemic with technology like Skype and things, it's a bit easier to do it. But back then it was just like pen and paper, and we didn't have like super advanced internet and fancy streaming the way that we do now. And that just kind of started to bring me into this new renewed interest in some games, and then moving forward a few years later, and this is about 7 to 8 years ago, when I started working for the company that I work for. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a software engineer, and I remember I have a friend in there, and I remember um, we just had a coffee one day, and then I went to his place, his apartment where he was living at the time. We just started to become good friends from the day to day interactions at work. And so
Hmm.
I remember he had a copy of Chaos in the Old World. And
Okay, by Eric
yeah,
Lang.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And it was like this big box with the art, and I'm like, what is that? Because he had a bunch of collectibles like in a bookshelf. He had his toys and he had a bunch of books, and then he had the board game, and that was like interesting. I'm like, so what's that? And he's like, oh yeah, it's a board game that an uncle brought for me from the United States that he told me, right? And I'm like, oh, interesting. And so he just gave me the box, and I saw it, and it was a pretty heavy box, and I had never seen anything like that before.
Hmm.
Up to this point, my exposure, like I said, it was just like your typical, games at a convenience store, right? And so I opened it up, and I saw the miniatures and the cardboard tokens, and the art was like super cool. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, from a nerdy standpoint. And up to that point, because I've been a gamer ever since I was a kid, right? And to
Hmm.
this day, I'm still a video gamer. I love video
Yeah.
games, and I play video games frequently. Um, but this was like something different, reminded me of a sort of like one of those RPG video games, like I said, but like in a small box. I was like,
Hmm.
huh, this is interesting. And then he just briefly told me about it, and the theme, and I'm like, huh, this is interesting. And so we just spoke briefly about it, and then we didn't touch the subject for a few weeks. And then he told me that he figured out there was a store opening up here in my city, that was selling collectibles, and he was selling some board games, and he was selling also some card games, like your typical Magic the Gathering, and some of these CCGs.
Hmm.
And then I didn't have anything to do, and he told me, I'm gonna go to this new store. Do you want to come over with me? And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's go. And so I remember getting there, and it was like a super small store, like, with a couple nerdy guys with some anime T-shirts, and they just had like their whole shelf full of Magic the Gathering stuff and other collectible games and a bunch of RPG books, but then they had this small shelf with just maybe 10 games that I remember now. It was like they had Catan, they had the Castle of Ravenloft from D&D, which is also a tabletop, like a dungeon crawler.
Hmm.
They had the Power Grid. I can't remember exactly which edition. I can't remember the other ones, but those were like the ones that stuck in my head.
Hmm.
And then I remember they had Gears of War. And so, like I said, I've been a gamer, and at that point I had played Gears of War 1 and 2 because I had an Xbox, and I love the Gears of War series. I have even played with my kids. I really like those games, and so that was like, there's even board games based on video game franchises. And
Hmm.
so the guy, I asked the guy in the store about it, and he brought me the copy, and I got the box, and then I just flip it over. Of course, it was in shrink wrap, right? But I loved it. I love the art, and what it said in the back, and the theme that portrayed and everything. And so I'm like, if anything, this is gonna be a nice thing to collect, and it wasn't really that expensive at the time. And I said, what the heck, and I got it. And then the guy just told me, yeah, I have another one, which, if you don't know, might be a bit better suited for you, because he asked me if I had played any games before, and I'm like, no, I really haven't played other than the typical games you find anywhere.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I can recommend something to you. And then he brought another box with the Pandemic, the first edition from Z-Man,
Yeah.
which didn't have like because right now the one that's being produced now has these nice transparent cubes, but that one back then, it was just like wooden cubes, and the art isn't as nice because they revamped the art in the second version,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah. It does look a lot nicer now than it did back when it
yeah,
first
yeah,
released.
because you have like the little trays, and so yeah, it's with the expansions and all that. But yeah, that was like the no, the very very first version of Pandemic. And then he said, he gave me a pretty good deal because, like I said, it was just like a local little store, and
Yeah.
like, if you get both of the games, I'm just gonna give you, like, I don't know, like a 20% discount. And I'm like, yeah, sure, what the heck. And so I bought the very first two modern games I got were Pandemic and the Gears of War board game. And so one of the things that piqued my interest about the Gears of War board game was the fact that it was single player too. It said
Hmm.
players 1 to 4, and I'm like, 1 to 4. And so yeah, the
Yeah.
guy told me that
How
you
does
could
that
play
work?
it
How
single
can you play
player.
a board game by yourself? You
Exactly,
can't.
exactly.
You
That was
can't
like
do
super
that.
weird for me. And then I remember opening them up, and all the cardboard and the smell, and I don't know, it was just I really loved it. And then I started reading the rule book, and it was pretty daunting, because
Yeah.
and I'm not sure right now, like, the Gears of War board game is one of those very rare collectible items because it's no longer produced. But it's a, I will say, a medium to medium heavy weight dungeon crawler.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's now, this is up to this point. Like, now, at this point in my gaming life, that's not something I would recommend to a new guy, because it's pretty complex, But I remember just getting interested into the whole game, and I decided to just get the game and play it solo, just see what was the whole thing about.
Hmm.
And I remember playing the campaign, and it was the mechanics were so smart, and it was a lot like playing the actual video game. And so then I brought it to my buddy, the one that invited me to go to the store, and the one that had the case in the old world. And so we got to play it together once, and I loved the experience. It was
Yeah.
like something I had never played before. Um, everything, from the mechanics for to playing together, because it's a co-op game, which is also something that was new for me.
Sure.
um, and I was like blown away. And then I was able to just get the pandemic game and play it with my family, with my wife, and then back then at the company I worked for, we started some game nights. My friend and I pushed the XX to create some game nights, and then we brought the games that we had, and we had a great time playing, and that's where my board game journey started, with those two games.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool.
And 8 years later, and a few hundred board games in my shelves, and yeah, Winston's laughing right now
And
because
and
he's
and
seen the
and
pictures and he knows.
yeah, yeah. A few hundred is probably a little bit of an understatement. Um, you get about
Yeah,
500 and probably an angry wife who doesn't quite understand,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna try to, the next time we do another podcast, to do it from where I have all the board games,
Yeah, oh,
because
yeah.
it's probably better fit for what we're doing now. Because I'm in my recording studio. I have a small audio engineering studio, but yeah, no, it's been great. I mean, that's where we're gonna delve into more details about all of the other experience that we've had through
Sure.
in our
Yeah.
board gaming life. But yeah, that's how it started. That's the way that it was for me.
Well, before I talk about, more about my own experience, isn't there something about looking at people's shelves, like gaming shelves? It's just like anytime I'm on Facebook and I see one, I want to stop and I want to look at what games they have, and especially if it's really organized. There's something about it. I always have to stop and look.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and I think it's really cool. Like, one thing that I do is, whenever I see someone's shelf, and I remember when you sent me some of the pictures of yours, you start to see which games they have. Like, oh,
yeah,
they got this and this and this, and some of the common games you have, and then some of the ones that you probably want to get.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Um, okay, so as I was growing up, board games started to fade for me as video games started to increase
right.
for me. But as like a teenager, early 20 year old, I still like playing games, but all the games I really knew, other than what I'd already been experienced to, was really party games, um, like Catchphrase uh, and what's that one? Cranium. Cranium was one of my
Oh
favorite games
yeah,
in a long
yeah,
time,
yeah. I remember
and
that one.
I would go to like a friend's house for like Christmas or some holiday with the rest of his family, and we would play Balderdash and things like that. And to me, that was what games were. Um, and I know this is going to sound silly to probably you and a lot of people, or whoever manages to catch this.
Yeah.
But I was at my friend's house. We were probably at this point. It might have been like his 30th birthday, and we're having pizza, we're having wings. He's like, "Hey, we're gonna play this game I got. It's awesome." And I'm like, "Okay, what's it about?" He's like, "Well, it's kind of like a dungeon crawler, but it's just cards." I'm like, "Okay," and it was Munchkin.
Oh,
It
okay.
was Munchkin, and I remember enjoying it. I didn't quite understand everything, and I know there's a lot of people who really discount Munchkin, but that did kind of start something in me, not to the level that you were at, and not to the level that I'm at now, but just knowing that there was more than just the games that you might see on the shelf of a Walmart. Because I'd never heard of this game before. I thought it was new, and turns out it wasn't. But he got that for me for my birthday, which is just a week after his, because he thought that I really, really enjoyed it. I'm not sure I really, really enjoyed it, but it
Right.
was it has its place. It really does.
Yeah.
Usually at the very bottom of my games that never get touched. But that's the but it's not a bad game. It's just a unique game.
Yeah.
But so around that same time I moved, and I got to know a few people that at the church I started attending there, and one of them invited me to a game day, like a game day after church or something. And I was like, oh man, I hope we play like Cranium. I wonder if we're gonna play Clue, like thinking of what we're gonna play.
Right.
And I get into his house, and at first I'm shocked because he has a whole room that's just got this big shelf of board games.
Wow.
I'm like, oh my gosh,
What
this
is
this
this, right?
this is crazy. He's got like,
Yeah.
he's got these shelves full of games, and I'm looking at the titles, and I'm like, okay, I don't know that
I don't
one.
know that one. I
Don't
don't
know
know
that
that
one.
one, right?
Don't know that one. I'm
What
like,
is that?
I'm looking for games like Sorry. I'm looking for, just not that I wanted to play
Yeah.
that, but I just wanted like, what is King of Tokyo? What what is this game called Sentinels of the Multiverse? That looks cool, but
Yeah.
I have no idea what it's about. And we sat down at his table, and the first thing we played was Bang the Dice game.
Oh, that's a great game.
Yeah, and I love rolling dice,
Yeah.
and um, I'm sitting there and he's explaining. I'm like, "Oh, this sounds complicated," you know, which a lot of times games do sound complicated. And
Right.
I think
Definitely.
as gamers, we have a bad habit of saying things like, "Well, it's complicated until you learn the rules."
Yeah.
Well, duh. Well, like it's complicated until you understand. Yeah, of course
Yeah.
it's complicated until
Of
you
course it's
understand.
gonna be, yeah.
Yeah. No, well, when you figure this out, it's going to be easy for you.
Yeah.
But the idea of a Yahtzee game, because I knew Yahtzee, I played that with my aunt, where you also were a hidden role that you didn't want anyone to know who you were
Yeah.
because you wanted to stay alive to for your aim, either to kill the sheriff if you're the an outlaw,
Hmm.
or to make sure everyone's dead if you're the renegade. And I thought, man, this is pretty fun. And we played some other things too. But the next time he invited me, I answered him real quick, like, yes, I want to come. That was really cool. And the next time we played Deception Murder in Hong Kong.
Oh, such a great game.
And as a person who grew up playing Clue and who still plays
Yeah.
Clue, as a matter of fact, I was looking at before we started recording, I was looking at my memories from Facebook, and apparently
Yeah.
4 years ago today, I played Clue with my family. Um, I was I played this game, and for those of you who might not know, there's a forensic scientist who's
Yeah.
giving clues um, without saying anything, just based on what's available on a card in front of them, 6 cards in front of the investigator. Everyone else is trying to solve a murder mystery. Well, one person who's trying to solve it actually is the one who committed the murder,
Yeah.
and everyone else has to decide after 3 rounds who that person is and how they committed this murder. And at the same time, they're trying to accuse other people because no one knows who the murderer is unless you have more cards. But for the very basis, that's all it is. And when we got done, my wife was like, "Did you enjoy this yourself?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, we played this game, and it was like an interactive like version of Clue. There wasn't like a board, but we did all these things, and there was a murderer. I was so excited.
So excited. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's really what it was. Although it was a slow start because yeah, I really enjoyed these things. I always wanted to go to his house and play these games, and we played a lot. We played a lot of different things. I mean, I remember not understanding when he said, "Hey, I want to have a game date, but unless you can commit at least 8 hours, don't bother coming."
Oh
Because we're gonna play,
wow.
because we're gonna play a game called oh my gosh, I just lost it.
Exodus?
No, not Exodus.
Twilight
Um,
Imperium?
yeah, he's like, we're
Twilight
gonna play a game
Imperium.
called Twilight Imperium. I'm
Yeah.
like, he's like, we need about 8 hours. I'm like, what? What in the world? So we weren't just playing, social deduction games. Uh, but it was about a year ago. It was a year ago in January, and I just thought, you know what? When I play video games, not that there's anything wrong with it, but
Right.
when I play video games, it's a very me and the device because I'd always play like handheld, as a
Yeah.
one-to-one thing, and my wife or my kids, they could be talking to me and I can respond, but I wasn't really focused on them. I was focused on that thing in front of
You
me.
on the game, right? Hmm.
Yeah, but with board games, except yes, solo games do exist, and I do play solo sometimes. It's more everyone is at a table together,
Yeah.
and whether you are in competition with each other or working together
Together, yeah.
it it's talking, you're socializing, uh, maybe you're trash talking a little bit, but it 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 just brings everyone together instead of
Yeah.
pushes them out, and that's what I really love about board games. And I haven't met your numbers yet there, Mr. Noe, but I started buying a lot, and you mentioned the first two that you bought were Gears of War and Pandemic.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes, sir.
the, do you still have those?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Well, um, the first version of Pandemic that I had, I gifted to one of my closest friends, which,
Okay.
he became addicted to the games. I don't know why. Um, yeah, no, I mean, he also became a huge fan, and he's got, I mean, not like me, but he's got a
Yeah.
solid maybe 10 to 20 games. He's bought a few recently. But yeah, no, he enjoys a bunch of those with his family, and I gifted that to him and his family
Yeah.
in one of his
Cool.
birthdays, and so that's just like one of their go-to games when they play together. But I bought it myself. I bought the newer version because I was interested in the expansion, so I
Yeah.
got the more recent version. So yeah, no, the version that I had is no longer with me. I still have the Pandemic, the classic edition.
Yeah.
And the Gears of War board game, like one of my relics.
Yeah.
It's
Part of your history.
yeah, yeah, no,
Part of your
definitely.
history.
And I don't play it as much nowadays. But yeah, no, definitely, it's one that's gonna stay in my collection for a while because of what it means, and and it's a great game. Even to the today's standards, and after so many games I've played, it just still holds up as a great game.
Yeah.
So
The first two I bought them at the same time, similar to what you did. Um, I ordered them off Amazon, and I know some people have a fit when they find out you bought board games on Amazon.
yeah,
But um,
which might be another
I
topic for the podcast. But
yeah,
yeah,
that could be. Get off your high horse, people.
right,
Amazon's a company too. Uh,
exactly.
um, but I bought One Night Ultimate Werewolf,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I was looking online because I was at Target and looking at what they had available, and I saw this game and I looked it up, and according to something on Amazon, it was the best board game of all time. And so I'm like, what was the best board game of all time? I gotta have it, right?
Yeah.
And but it was Betrayal at House on the Hill,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and um, a couple months later, I sold that without even playing it. I never played I never played Betrayal. And then personally, I did end up getting rid of One Night Ultimate Werewolf as well, just because it's a social deduction game as well, and I've got
Yeah.
a couple. I've got Deception, and I really love that. And it's just a little bit more difficult to explain to people who've never played something like that
Yeah.
because you have to come up with all the conversation yourself.
Yeah, you just sort of gotta push people to have some of those conversations, and it requires a specific group.
So,
If yeah,
and I'd just rather play something else, but that's
right,
that's kind of like that's where I'm at. I got rid of my first two, but
right. That's cool.
but hey, I really enjoyed hearing your story, and
Yeah,
uh, yeah, I enjoy sharing the stories. And if you, audience, have any stories about how you got into the hobby that you'd like to share, make sure that you do that. We would love to hear them because, after all, we're all gamers, and we just want to.
yep,
We like to talk games. We like to talk games, and our
exactly.
wives are tired of hearing about games, so we want to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you, Noe,
Yeah, no, it's a
and th-
pleasure, my friend.
and thank you guys for tuning in to Across Borders. Hope to catch you next time.
Sure. Yeah. Send us your comments, and if anything that you would like us to talk about, and any topics you want to hear about, yeah, we will definitely certainly talk about it. So yeah,
Yeah, let's
thank
let's
you.
let's let's start a conversation.
Right on, and let's keep spreading love for board games.
All right, man.
All
Talk to you
right.
later.
Talk to you later, buddy. Bye.